Yes, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, joining me as he always does. You guys know the name by now, I would hope. It's our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, we're here for a new exciting podcast series we're going to be starting as we head into the rest of the ACC football season. And I'm kind of tentatively calling it, I don't think it's going to be called this in terms of what you read on YouTube, but I'm thinking it being called kind of This Week in the ACC, because essentially what we're going to be looking at is all the ACC matchups coming up this weekend and just kind of diving into it and obviously relating it back to Carolina as well, because this is obviously a Carolina specific channel. So AJ, I'm going to go ahead and there's 14 games this weekend, just so everybody knows, 13 of them being on Saturday, one being on Thursday night. So I'm going to separate these in just terms of 7 games we'll talk about first, and then we'll run through the final 7 after that, just for continuity purposes on this one. So I'll go ahead and list out, I'll pop a graphic up on the screen as well, but I'll go ahead and list the first 7 games we're going to be talking about. That starts on Thursday night, like I mentioned, with Murray State at Louisville. Then moving on to Saturday, 11 a.m. kickoff. You got Vanderbilt at Wake Forest, followed by Notre Dame at NC State. Very intriguing matchup right there. That'll be in Raleigh. Purdue at Virginia Tech. Holy Cross at BC. James Madison at Virginia, followed by South Carolina State at Georgia Tech at 1 p.m. So those are 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. slates for those games being at noon, and a couple intriguing matchups in there, AJ. I think a lot of ACC fans will agree. The ones that stand out to me is obviously Notre Dame at NC State. I think Purdue at Virginia Tech is an interesting matchup as well. And one of my other ones in here, which is going to be interesting to watch out, not in terms of maybe excitement level from football fans as a whole, but the James Madison at Virginia matchup. You look at how poor Virginia is this year. James Madison, very, very good team in the Sun Belt. One of the teams picked to win that one. That could be a very tough matchup for the Cavaliers as well. So run through that slate with me. What do you think about some of those? Because there's a few intriguing ones in there.
Well, let's look at the Power 5 opponents.
Yeah,
because that's how you're going to get your name. So let me try to remember here. You got Purdue at Virginia Tech.
Yep. Vanderbilt at Wake Forest as well.
Purdue lost to, who was it? Ball State or somebody in the first game? Not Ball State, but
something like that. I do remember
lost to somebody, I think, from the MAC.
That.
Purdue at Virginia Tech.
Fresno State. It was Fresno State.
Fresno. Oh, that's right. Okay, Fresno. Well, maybe a little bit better than MAC teams.
Yeah, not a bad program.
And it was at home, so that doesn't mean Purdue stinks. Fresno has had good teams in the past. This is a big game for Virginia Tech because the Hokies they need a good win. They need to show that they're making progress. They were a little underwhelming in beating ODU, but at least they beat them this time. They lost to them last year. So, and they beat them because they have one of ODU's receivers, a kid who transferred over to Virginia Tech. But I think Virginia Tech's going to have some quarterback questions for a while. Mm-hmm. And if Grant Wells doesn't get pushed, this is a wonderful opportunity for him against a Power 5 team to have a pretty good game. So I know this game is not going to register on a lot of radars, but it's an important game for the league because all Power 5 games are important for the ACC. Even the ACC team that UNC doesn't play, because the better the perception of the league is, the better perception of North Carolina will be if the Tar Heels have a really good year moving into the season. What are some of the other Power 5 ones?
Well, I think
Texas A&M at Miami, right?
Yeah, Texas A&M and Miami is one of them.
That's huge.
Let's leave that for the second half of the podcast because I'm going to run through those a little bit later. Let's talk about Notre Dame and NC State because I think that's the one that is the most intriguing to me, in my opinion, at least.
Well, first of all, let me say this. If I'm an NC State fan, I am annoyed and ticked off that that's a noon start. Mm-hmm. How often does Notre Dame play at noon? And this is Notre Dame's second trip to Raleigh. Mm-hmm. Well, back 2016, the Hurricane game day, and they wouldn't have had a crowd there anyway because the Hurricane game was that was a noon start. What is this about Notre Dame starting at noon in Raleigh? I don't like that. I would love, and Dave Doran would love to see this like a 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock game. Give those fans all day to get frothed up, literally. And have Notre Dame have to deal with that atmosphere at night. That would be the best atmosphere in college football this weekend, period. Mm. So that said, it's still going to be a really good atmosphere. And I kind of like the Wolfpack's chances in this game. It would be an enormously important win for the ACC if they get it, because Notre Dame has won, 26, 27 straight regular season games against the ACC.
That's wild.
I also think as we will regularly weave in the UNC component, Carolina plays State at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. You want that game to be as important as it possibly can for North Carolina, as big as it can for North Carolina, and that means NC State winning. I know a lot of people listening right now like, I can't pull for NC State. I think you need to. Mm-hmm. You need to pull for the teams on your schedule to do well, to give more value to your schedule. Mm-hmm. and to help the league. And I think it's time the league beats Notre Dame. Notre Dame's got to come to Duke in a few weeks. They go to Clemson, I believe, this year. But this is the year the ACC should be able to beat them. And it's not like State hasn't had success against Sam Hartman before.
No.
So that's gonna be a fun game. I'll be able to see the first half of it before I head to Chapel Hill, but I'll record it. And I'm looking forward to that game. I think Notre Dame wins, but I think State's going to be very tough, and I think they have a chance to win.
Yeah, I know we're mainly focusing on the Power 5 matchups in this one because nobody wants to hear about South Carolina State at Georgia Tech. But just to throw another one in, what I mentioned earlier, James Madison at Virginia, I think that's an intriguing matchup. Obviously, the Tar Heels playing Virginia at home on October 21st. So, Virginia probably, I don't know if they're definitely the worst team in the league, but they're looking like that right now. But I'm telling you, that's one I'm got circled because I think that could be a win for James Madison when you look at just kind of where both programs are at right now.
Yeah, the emotion of what UVA is going through.
That is true. That will play a little bit of a factor being the first. It's
all going to come back Saturday.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Virginia football lost big to Tennessee the other day, but it won when Mike Hollins carried the flag out of the tunnel and then when he got on the field. And I don't mean to over dramatize this because I don't think you can. So I think UVA and Mike Hollins won, and I was really hoping that he would do well. And I thought Virginia's defense was pretty good for a while, and then everything just kind of fell apart. I think this is a club that doesn't have great confidence. I'm not so sure that Tony Elliott's the guy, and they're going to play a club that's going to be highly confident, have a chip on its shoulder, and let's face it, JMU might be the best football program in the state of Virginia. Probably is. Program, man. They've got a great facilities. They are investing. They want to be big time. They're good, and I would be surprised if UVA wins a game this year, to be honest with you. And that's no disrespect to UVA at all. I just think if they're going through a real rough time on a lot of different levels, and they were really bad in football before the tragedy happened. And so if you judge them strictly on football, I didn't see anything last Saturday that made me believe that anything has changed there.
No, they did not look good against Tennessee, which, I mean, again, it's Tennessee, a good program, but I'm kind of with you there. I think Virginia's unfortunately, because I feel like it's good for Carolina as well. That's a great rivalry to go up to, especially when it's played in Charlottesville, South's oldest rivalry. So a little bit unfortunate from a Carolina selfish perspective that they are struggling. But traditionally, I like having Virginia as kind of one of the better programs in the league. I think it's good for the league and both Virginia programs, really, Virginia Tech and Virginia being two programs that are down towards the bottom of the ACC in terms of kind of expectations this year. And I don't think that's good for the league because they are programs in the past that have been two of the better ones. So maybe, hopefully, one day in the near future, they'll kind of get back to being a better program because they have struggled over the past couple years. So those are the
Commonwealth Cup. The Commonwealth Cup could be a mess this year.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It absolutely could be.
I do think the Hokies are going to be decent. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Brent Pry's the right guy yet. I think it takes time. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's a little more optimism that he is the right guy more than Tony Elliott.
I've got a theory.
That's aside from how Elliott handled everything that happened. Yeah. Ultimately, he has to be judged as the football coach, not the other stuff.
Exactly. I have a theory that Shane Beamer ends up at Virginia Tech somehow in the future. I think that'd be pretty cool, too, just to have it back there. But I don't know. It depends how he does, obviously.
Write your own script somewhere else.
Yeah, but I think it would be makes sense in a lot of different ways. I don't know if Brent Pry.
They just better wherever he goes. If he goes somewhere else, they just better not serve hot dogs to the chain gang.
He was pissed off about that one.
That was one of the dumbest. Those are the dumbest comments I've
ever heard. That was a hell of a quote. That was one that he probably.
They get an onside kick right afterwards. It obviously didn't affect you.
Yeah, had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
I think that's one. Stupid thing. I think that's one he probably woke up in the morning like. Yeah, probably shouldn't have said that. That left a little petulant.
Coaches don't. A lot of coaches don't think that way.
That is true. That is a fact. Real quickly, before we move on to the second half of the slate, which I think there's some interesting matchups in there. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp, so we're had a quick ad read about BetterHelp here in a second. So stay tuned for that one. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. help. Sometimes in life we're faced with tough choices and the path forward isn't always clear. So whether it's dealing with, decisions around your career, maybe your relationship or anything else, whatever it may be, therapy helps you stay connected to what you really want while you navigate life so you can move forward with confidence and excitement and trusting yourself to make these decisions that align with your values is like anything. The more you practice it, the better and easier it gets. I know for me sometimes, as somebody who uses therapy, that sometimes talking things through with someone is just incredibly helpful, and we can all get in our own heads a little bit too much sometimes, and getting out of that by getting feedback from a licensed and trained professional can bring a ton of clarity to your life. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, guys, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule, which is just so huge in my opinion, because convenience is just so big in today's world. And with BetterHelp, you can do everything online. So let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/THI to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's betterhelp.com/THI to get 10% off your first month. Links in the description below. Back to the show. All right, AJ, let's dive back into the second half of the slate this weekend. It starts with Charleston Southern at Clemson. 25th ranked Clemson, obviously dropping in the rankings after the loss to Duke. I want to talk about that and what it kind of means for the Carolina a little bit here in a second. So we'll dive into that one here in a few. But yeah. Texas A&M at Miami, another intriguing matchup, 3:30 kickoff in Coral Gables. Western Michigan at Syracuse, Appalachian State at North Carolina. Obviously, we talked about that in the UNC football show. Go check that one out if you haven't seen that one. Lafayette at 21st ranked Duke, obviously popping into the rankings after their win over Clemson. And then Cincinnati at Pittsburgh. I think that's an intriguing matchup. 6:30 p.m. kickoff on the CW network. And then you got Southern Miss at Florida State to round off the ACC slate for this weekend. So, AJ, we're not really going to talk about Clemson and Charleston Southern because it's Charleston Southern, but I want to go back to Duke's upset win over Clemson, because for me, that's very intriguing in terms of what it means for not only the league as a whole, but Carolina specifically as a team that wants to ultimately challenge and win an ACC championship. And I think has a team that could potentially do that this year. So what do you think, in your opinion, what does Duke's win over Clemson? Because Duke's obviously emerged kind of now as this program that might be able to do something in the league. They got Riley Leonard, nice quarterback. They got some really nice parts over there. But in a broader picture, in terms of Carolina specifically, do you think that does the Duke's win over Clemson maybe provide an opportunity in North Carolina? Does it open up the league a little bit more? I know Florida State's pretty good as well this year, maybe the best team in the league. But what are your thoughts on what that might mean for the Tar Heels moving forward?
Well, everyone had etched in stone that it would be Clemson and Florida State and Charlotte at the end of the year. So I think it should give a little bit more
optimism, maybe
tunnel optimism, or maybe it opens things up a little bit more for a Carolina or a Pitt or whoever to get in there and take that other spot, the Clemson spot. But of course, Clemson beat itself in a lot of ways, and Duke gets credit for a lot of that. Yeah, Clemson's better than the way it performed the other night. So we'll see how the Tigers handle this. But I think what it does is you can look at this two ways for the league, and Carolina's affected by the league. One, it takes a lot of shine off Clemson. People have been kind of waiting to shovel some dirt on Dabo, and I think this allowed people at least chuck a few dirt clods his way. And they don't carry the same cachet right now, and they may not carry the same cachet all year long. The 28-7 may stick with them until even if they beat Florida State in a couple of weeks. When that happened, people say, "Oh, well, Florida State lost to a team that got clobbered by Duke," because Duke's not going to move the needle much. On the flip side, is it makes Duke a more valuable commodity for the season, having them on the schedule. And it really, if Clemson gets rolling, which could still happen, look at the last three games. Duke at home, at Clemson, at State.
It could be such a fascinating stretch, man. It really could be.
So you got to figure, if Duke is pretty good, a lot better than people think, it opens up the possibility that Carolina gets another CFP top 25 win if they beat Duke. So if you look down the road, if Clemson figures things out and wins enough, that could be a CFP top 25 team. There's a good chance NC State could be that by the end of the year. Pittsburgh could be that by the end of the year. It's possible South Carolina is, maybe even Minnesota. And now you throw Duke, and then got Miami as well as on the schedule. Now you throw Duke in the mix, which you didn't think was going to be that. So if Carolina needs to accumulate CFP top 25 wins, with the CFP rankings, I think that this opens up an opportunity to do that, to give them another game against a club that people respect. Because I think as much as Duke got out of Riley Leonard the other night, as much people are talking about him, to me, the story wasn't Riley Leonard. The story was how physical Duke was.
Yeah.
The story was how many Blue Devils got to the ball and made sure the ball was not advanced. They were awesome in pre-snap. Awesome in pre-snap. So that should be there every week. Mm-hmm. And I think that they really might be pretty good. They got Notre Dame in a couple of weeks, and they got NC State at home. They have a chance to have like 3 sellouts in football this year. This could be a really neat year for Duke as well. So I think that is good for the conference because it makes Duke more interesting, and for Carolina, that adds another team on the schedule that might generate some respect with a win. But it hurts the league in terms of national perception because college football is about who you are at the top. It's not about who you are in the middle and the bottom. And right now, the ACC has one team near the top and a few others that are going to try like the Dickens to get up there. But it's a lot harder for Pitt and North Carolina to develop that reputation than it is for Florida State. So in that sense, I think it's bad for the league and for Carolina.
No, I do agree with you on those points. Moving on to another interesting matchup. Again, we're really just focusing on the P5 ones in this one, Texas A&M and Miami. I think that's an interesting one as well. Still not really sure what to expect out of Miami this year. Probably say the same thing about Texas A&M with how they've done over the past couple of seasons. But, if Miami can get a win in that game, it'd be a positive for the league.
Yeah, Miami was horrific offensively in that game last year.
Yeah.
And Tyler Van Dyke was just awful. Receivers were awful, dropping balls. Miami should win this game. This is another ACC SEC opportunity. I think the ACC, with a lot of games at home this weekend, they need to have a good weekend. By the way, did you see where ESPN Sports Center did some bit about what's wrong with the ACC?
Yeah, it was outrageous. They talked about like the 4 worst teams in the league.
And they talked about 2 of the losses that were to their own conference teams.
I know. It made no sense. It was just such an obvious narrative push from ESPN or something. I don't know. It's
just idiots up there that don't really follow what's going on.
I'm not talking about the fact that ACC did fantastic against the SEC.
The kind that they pose for a Facebook shot of their coffee at the ESPN lunchroom to show the world they're there, and they don't really know what the hell's going on. They're all over the place in this world, in this industry. So I think this is a great opportunity again for the league. Mm-hmm. They need to pound them. Mm-hmm. I think A&M's good. I think last year was an aberration. I think Miami's better. They took care of business with Miami of Ohio, which is not a horrible program. And a lot of times Miami sort of screws around in games like that, and they were pretty solid. So they need to win the game. The league needs them to win the game. North Carolina needs them to win the game because Miami comes in the middle of October. Mm-hmm. And you want that game to matter. If Miami wins, that game matters more, and it puts Carolina on a bigger stage when they play that game. So that's for Drake, and that's for the team in trying to build a lot of steam for this season and improve it, the perception people have of it. So I think Miami wins. I think the ACC does well in these non-conference games this weekend. I think Miami wins that one.
Agreed. I think they have a good chance as well.
And by the way, I know you're not probably bringing it up, but Western Michigan, Syracuse.
Yeah, I was going to say that's an interesting one in some ways.
Western Michigan's good. Mm-hmm. They beat Pitt a couple years ago at Pitt. That's a good program. It's one of the better programs in the MAC. They've got some guys that can play. What did Syracuse learn against Colgate?
Nothing.
And it's the kind of game that Dino could lose. Mm-hmm. So, and Syracuse plays Carolina the week before Miami comes down. So they need Syracuse to win this game because a loss will really hurt the way people look at Syracuse. They're not going to get a bounce out of a win, but they can get a lot of negatives out of a loss, even though Western Michigan is a pretty solid team. They're better than a lot of low-end Power 5 teams. So that's an important game as well.
No doubt about it. Last one I kind of want to focus on. This is not the one I want to focus on, but Lafayette at Duke. The only reason I'm bringing this one up is because it will be interesting to see how Duke responds after an emotional big win over Clemson. You expect them to win that game regardless, but that is one of the more intriguing things about college sports is when you're coming off an upset win, storming the field on a Monday night. Yeah. So it's a short turnaround. That could be a game that does Duke maybe not win it as convincingly as people expect them to do. And if they don't, is that maybe an indication of can they really sustain this going into the rest of the year? I expect them to win pretty conveniently over Lafayette. I didn't even know Lafayette had a football team, no disrespect to them, but that should be a game that they're winning.
Lafayette Bucknell game is history. I mean, there's a lot of history behind that game.
I guess I'm
look, I could never get into Lafayette academically, but I could have walked on and played football there. So that's all you need to know about this game.
Yeah, exactly.
Duke in a romp.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't Vandy play Wake this week?
Yeah, we actually forgot to talk about that one in the opening.
Yeah, that's an important one for the league.
Matchup.
Yeah, Carolina doesn't play Wake, but that's a really important game because people. I listen to a lot of the Sirius XM stuff because I'm in the car going to and from Chapel Hill, and it's like they want so badly for Vandy to be good, so they could talk about them being another SEC team other than just a club that's cashing checks and not doing a whole lot. And there's not a lot of respect for Wake. Wake is a much better program than Vanderbilt. It's not even.
It's not even close, man.
But a lot of people think Vandy's going to go in there and win. So you've got to rack up wins as a league against Power Fives. And this is another ACC SEC.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if Miami could beat A&M and Wake beats Vandy, that's 2-0 against the SEC again this weekend. So that's how you change perception as a league. You win these games. Purdue, Virginia Tech is not going to register real high on the radar. I don't think Wake Vandy is going to register that high, but those are very important games for a league that is clamoring for any kind of positive respect, for a Sports Center not do those stupid things like they did the other day about what's wrong with the ACC. You got to win these games, and you got to. We talk about stacking performances with Carolina. The league has to stack numbers. They need to sit there at the end of October, early November, and when Fowler and Herbstreit are doing their ABC Saturday night game, they say, hey, look at the ACC. You know, they're 7-1 against the SEC this year. They're 5-2 against the Big Ten. You want that. You need that. And that helps North Carolina in every conceivable way. It doesn't hurt UNC at all. It helps UNC. And the league needs to win right now.
Uh-huh.
Let's face it. They just need to win, period. They need football to matter more. They need better TV ratings. They need more people in the seats. They need more people to stream. They need all that stuff so they can become more valuable, so everyone's happier moving forward.
Exactly. And last one, AJ, we're going to talk about real quickly because I think one of the more intriguing matchups this weekend in terms of the near future of Carolina opponents is Cincinnati at Pittsburgh. That to me is a good one. Cincinnati coming off a very, very convincing win in week 1 against Eastern Kentucky, 66-13. Going into Pittsburgh, I think that's a matchup Carolina fans should be intrigued about to see how Pittsburgh performs in that one.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that this should be an ACC game next year instead of Cal at Pitt, something like that.
Makes a little bit more sense, doesn't it?
SMU at Pitt. Yeah, Scott Satterfield's at Cincinnati now.
Yep.
And Cincinnati's been a pretty good program. I think that this would be a really good win for Pitt. So since he's a Power 5 now, they're back into the power leagues. So this would constitute as a Power 5 win if Pittsburgh's able to get it. I think it's a really good game for Pitt to play. Because Cincinnati's going to be physical. They got dudes, they can play, and it would be a really solid win for Pitt. It would be another one of those enhancers for the ACC. And also for Carolina, it's good that Pitt has a good team on the schedule before Carolina goes there, because Carolina is going to learn a lot from the film of Pitt this week in this game, because they're going to be challenged on every level of the game by a Cincinnati team that's pretty good.
Yeah, definitely agree. Real quickly, we're heading out here in 1 second, but I just want to talk about real quickly the two non-conference matchups for some of Carolina's non-conference opponents, one of which they faced last weekend in South Carolina, and then the next one coming up. We're not going to talk about Campbell for obvious reasons, which is the other non-conference game, along with App State, which is this weekend. But South Carolina versus Furman, expect South Carolina to bounce back in that one at home. And then you got Minnesota versus Eastern Michigan. Minnesota coming off a win over Nebraska in their opening game. So Eastern Michigan, another good program. Like I said, I know Cincinnati that was Eastern Kentucky, not Eastern Michigan, but another program that traditionally is pretty good in terms of what they do in their conference. So 2 games you'd expect Carolina's non-conference opponents to win, but another things that Carolina should be keeping an eye off, especially with that Michigan game coming up next weekend.
Yeah, South Carolina is very likely not going to lose, but check the box score. Look at the sacks allowed.
Yep.
And look at the rushing yards. Look at the average yards per carry, the total rushing yards that South Carolina has in that game. If they have really good numbers there and Rattler's not sacked, okay, that's cool. But if Furman gets 5 or 6 sacks and South Carolina runs for 60 yards and they're averaging 2.7 a carry, that might take a little little bit of the shine off of what Carolina did last week, because that would be an indicator that maybe there's a lot of trouble up front. The offensive line for South Carolina might explain some of what we saw the other night. Eastern Michigan has been a little bit better of late. They got a pretty good coach right now. Historically they've been really bad at times.
Yeah, they haven't. And trending up.
And they play on a hideous gray field. Mm-hmm. They have some of the hideous uniforms in college football. But where are they going?
Minnesota.
Minnesota. Yeah, Minnesota screws around with MAC teams every once in a while. They have to get turnovers late to win and stuff like that. But I think Minnesota is going to be ready to play in this one. It's going to be an important game to look at what they are offensively, because they scored 13 points against Nebraska.
I know.
And beat them on a last-second field goal. They couldn't move the ball to save their lives. So, what do they look like offensively in this game? If they could start generating some stuff for North Carolina, I think it'd be good if Minnesota rolls in this game. Because you talk about getting guys' attention. I think Minnesota would get their attention anyway because it's a Big Ten team, but it'll get their attention more if the Gophers put a 50 spot up on Eastern Michigan. So if you're a North Carolina fan, hope for a big Minnesota rout so they could put a lot of impressive stuff on film and get the Tar Heels in the right frame of mind for that game.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that one in Chapel Hill next weekend. And that's going to be a really fun one.
I've never seen Minnesota in football in person before.
Me either. Yeah, me either. It'd be a great stadium.
I've seen them in basketball several times, but I've never seen them play in person in football. I know that a lot of people are like, well, I've never thought about Minnesota. Yeah. Well, I view the world in that kind of bizarre lens.
I like matchups like that too. Bringing a team like that from the Big Ten. I enjoy matchups like that. It's more intriguing to me than playing.
I've seen a lot of Big Ten teams in person. I've seen, well, I might as well rattle them off now. Current Big Ten teams: Maryland, Rutgers, Penn State, Ohio State, Indiana, Purdue, Michigan.
Michigan State? Seen them play?
No, I've not. Michigan State. I've seen them play in person in football. I actually saw them play at Indiana. Let's see. I have seen Northwestern. I've not seen Iowa in football, but I was there for basketball.
Yeah, great. I'd love to go to an Iowa game. I think that'd be cool.
I've not seen Nebraska, and I've not seen Minnesota. I've seen Iowa in basketball a few times. I saw them at Iowa. Carolina played there a couple of years ago, but I've not seen Iowa in football. And if I did see them, I would squint and think I'm watching the Steelers. I have seen the Steelers in person, so I've sort of seen Iowa, right?
Similar jerseys, right? No, yeah, it's an interesting slate this week at ACC. There's not a ton of maybe electric matchups. And again, once we dive into conference games, it'll be even more interesting. But definitely some ones to keep an eye on around the league, particularly with NC State, particularly with Wake Forest, and again, especially with the likes of Miami and Pittsburgh too. There's definitely some matchups to keep an eye on, and throw Virginia Tech in there as well against Purdue. So AJ, that'll do it for this one. New segment we're starting. I'm sure we're working out the kinks on this one, trying to go through ACC teams and kind of figure out who's who, and it's still very early in the season, so not a ton we know yet maybe about a lot of these ACC programs, but as the weeks continue, we'll know a lot more, and then obviously Carolina will be faced up with a lot of these teams as well, so definitely important to keep an eye on as ACC season approaches, with only starting in a couple weeks now with Carolina's trip to Pittsburgh on September 23rd. So keep it locked to TarIllustrated.com for all your coverage of North Carolina football, basketball, and recruiting. Links in the description below. Come be a premium subscriber, just $8.33 a month. You can become a Carolina insider too. As always, I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell as well, so you know every single time we upload. See you all on the next one. Thanks.